James Howard Dutch Kindelberger was born in Wheeling, West Virginia on May 8, 1895 to Charles Frederick Kindelberger, a steelworker, and Roseanne Kindelberger. James took on the nickname Dutch at an early time in his life, referring to his descent from German immigrants. Dutch was a high school dropout, leaving in the 10th grade to go work with his father in the steel mill. Dutch said it consisted of throwing pig iron around from 7 in the morning until 5:30 at night, and he wanted out. So Dutch took correspondence courses for 2 years until he qualified for a position with the Army Air Corps as a civilian draftsman and inspector. He would later work 20 hours a day studying to pass his high school equivalency exam and gain entrance into Pittsburgh's Carnegie Institute of Technology. It was in 1913, when aerial exhibitionist Lincoln Beachey performed above the Wheeling Fairgrounds, that Dutch first fell in love with flying in planes. But it was not until he had completed his first year at Carnegie and America had entered World War I that he finally enlisted in the aviation section. He had completed his ground school at Ohio State and earned his wings at Park Field near Memphis, but the war ended before he had a chance to go overseas. During World War I, Dutch was a member of the U.S. Army Air Service and was a Curtiss JN-4, also known as a Jenny pilot and instructor based out of Park Field in Memphis. After the war, Dutch looked for work in aviation. In 1920, he became chief draftsman and assistant chief engineer with the Glenn L. Martin Company in Cleveland, Ohio. Dutch worked with Glenn Martin, Donald Douglas, and Larry Bell. All four men were considered aeronautical geniuses. Dutch stayed with Glenn Martin for about 5 years and gained experience helping to develop the Martin bombers used by Billy Mitchell for the battleship bombing tests. In 1925, Dutch joined the Douglas Aircraft Company and by 1928 had risen to become vice president of engineering. His genius for design showed at Douglas. During this period, he turned out 71 separate models for the Air Corps, Navy, and civilian use. His greatest was the DC series. The DC-3 was the most popular, and more than 10,000 were built for civil and military use. In 1934, North American Aviation asked him to take over as president. Dutch took J.L. Lee Atwood with him from Douglas and made Lee his vice president. Dutch quickly built the company into one of the world's leading aircraft manufacturers. In the 1940s, North American Aviation produced two of the Second World War's most legendary warplanes, the B-25 Mitchell bomber and the P-51 Mustang. Sometime between 1939 and 1941, some sources are conflicting, the British Air Ministry asked North American Aviation to build Curtiss P-40 Warhawk fighters for the Royal Air Force. However, the total output of the Curtiss factory was strictly for U.S. military use. Dutch told his UK contacts that North American could create a better design and completed the prototype of the legendary P-51 Mustang in 4 months. Kindelberger said on labor relations, "If the men of the shop are happy in their jobs, it is surprising how many more times they can hit something with a hammer than if they are sour about it." Dutch had a saying about perfectionists who delayed production. "It takes 2 men to make an airplane drawing," he said. "One to sit on his fanny and draw the lines, the other to knock him on the head with a baseball bat when he's through." He claimed he was paraphrasing Lee Atwood, but I think not. In all, 42,000 aircraft were built by the company by the end of the war. After World War II, Dutch built America's first swept-wing jet fighter, the F-86 Sabre jet, which defeated the Russian-built MiGs over Korea. Lee Atwood expected there would be need for improved rocket engines based on those developed by the Germans for the V-2. Lee and Dutch decided in 1946 to invest $1 million in a rocket engine test facility in Santa Susana, California, and a supersonic wind tunnel at Los Angeles International Airport. This paid off when North American landed the contract to develop the Navajo, a rocket-boosted intercontinental cruise missile. In 1948, Dutch was promoted to chairman and chief executive officer, with Lee replacing him as president. The Navajo project allowed North American to develop expertise in rocket engines, inertial navigation systems, and supersonic aerodynamics. This in turn led to securing contracts for many advanced aerospace vehicles in the late 1950s. The X-15 manned hypersonic spaceplane, the Hound Dog missile, and the XB-70 Valkyrie triple-sonic bomber. The XB-70 required the company to develop new materials, welding, and manufacturing processes. Dutch also pioneered U.S. rocket research in the 1950s. In 1958, North American Aviation rolled out the X-15 rocket, which was the next critical step between the domain of jet aviation and manned spaceflight. Dutch said, up to the year 1930, I could carry in my head practically all you had to know. Now we have subdivided specialties. We have people who work on flutter, nothing but flutter. We have 6 kinds of aerodynamicists, including internal aerodynamicists, who study air's behavior in the ducts of engines. If an internal aerodynamicist bungles, your airplane is a cluck. In 1960, Dutch retired and Lee took over as chief executive. Dutch remained chairman of the board until his death on July 27, 1962, due to congestive heart failure at the age of 67. Upon his death, Lee became chairman of the board. Dutch left behind a legacy. Under his direction and ingenuity, North American aviation broke technological barriers, produced propeller and jet-powered fighters and bombers, military trainers, rocket engines, and rocket-powered aircraft, and began its role as the prime contractor for the country's space program. Between 1935 and 1967, North American aviation built more military aircraft than any other plane maker in U.S. history. In July 1969, under North American Aviation's leadership, the Apollo moon landing was successfully achieved. Dutch's leadership drove his employees as well as his fellow pioneers in aviation to follow him because of his innovation, creativity, and hard-working integrity. At one time, he told his crew not to work overtime or I'll be in the hoosegow. One night, he found the plant all lit up. There was an uproar of pounding, yelling, and singing. One of the Dutchmen who worked for him explained, "After 8 hours' work, we ring out and go to Helen's place for beer. Then we come back and have fun getting the job done. There's no law against having fun." Dutch was a leader in the 5 practices of leadership. He modeled the way when he trained to be a pilot and instructor during World War II. Dutch inspired a shared vision by working closely with Glenn Martin, Donald Douglas, and Larry Bell, then partnering up with J.L. Lee Atwood. He challenged the process when he left Douglas Aircraft and became president of North American Aviation, taking Lee Atwood with him. Dutch enabled others to act when he continued his partnership with Atwood, and they both worked together to invest money needed to fund the Navajo project. Finally, Dutch encouraged the heart by leaving behind a legacy for future aeronautics engineers and aviators to never stop dreaming. I chose I chose James Howard Dutch Kindelberger because he's actually family on my dad's side. I grew up hearing stories about Dutch and I wanted to know more, and now I do. Thank you.